Hello friends and colleagues, I'm Stanislav Chernog, the founder of the School of Vector Massage and Somatics, and today we're talking about the topic that is relevant to many of us, bulging belly. To make today's video we've been inspired by the example of our model. It is quite obvious that if there was no belly, if her belly was flatter, our model would look both younger and better. For 20 years of practice, I've become convinced that a huge number of people walk with their tummy, and at the same time they already are so used to this that they perceive it as something normal and inevitable. Understanding some basic simple principles will allow you to understand in what cases you need to work on your posture in order to clearly and quickly change the state of your bulging belly. Let's release our model. I want to talk about the theory, move through the time code to the practical part of the work if you aren't interested in the theory. Before we figure out how to work with this particular case, let's look at why in general people's stomach falls out. The most common problem, 40 to 60%, is excessive lordosis in the lumbar spine. Hyperlordosis is just the case of our model. In addition, weakness of the abdominal wall is a common problem. In such case, either the rectus abdominis is weakened or the oblique and transverse abdominis muscles are weakened. In any case, the abdominal wall is unable to hold the contents of the abdomen and the tummy falls out. A common problem is the problem of the digestive system. If, for example, a person has flatulence, then these gases swell the intestines and the stomach again falls out. Excessive bowel tone leads to weakening of the abdominal muscles, so these are related problems. In addition, very often people think that building up of the fat tissue under the skin is the main reason, and accordingly at the moment when people think that they have a big belly, they decide to remove fat under the skin, and this unfortunately very rarely leads to a good result. Finally, it is a poorly understood problem, the presence of abdominal fat between the internal organs. Accordingly, it appears in those cases, first of all, when the internal organs aren't fixed normally, relatively to each other, and the body is trying to somehow keep the internal organs together with help of internal fat. Today, we will talk with you about hyperlordosis and the problems associated with it, and how in fact to work on it. It is important to understand that a healthy belly, according to modern concepts, looks well contoured, especially when we are talking about a women's one. The presence of dimples over the ilium is necessary. For the female belly, it is not necessary and rather contraindicated for the abs to be visible, because there must be some supply of fat tissue. The tummy should be concentrated in the middle and should not fall out. The condition of the navel is a good indicator. If the navel is directed downward, then it indicates that the belly is dumped. In addition, for us a very important indicator of the abdomen is the condition of the lower back. If the lower back is excessively bent forward, if the spine is very deep between the muscles of the lower back, this indicates that the deflection in the lumbar spine is excessive and the belly is more likely to be larger than it should be in a natural, healthy state. Why it is important to understand that a bulging belly is not only an aesthetic problem, what terrible problems in your body this can lead to. First of all, you should be aware that excessive deflection in the lumbar spine is a pathology. It leads to a disproportion of muscle tension, and this leads to the fact that the lumbar discs do not work properly, the joints do not work correctly, the nerves that come out of the lumbar vertebrae are pinched, and this leads to serious difficulties in the pelvis, in the lower extremities. This is edema, this is pain, this is varicose veins, it is the inability to move normally. This is the risk of injury with subsequent illnesses. Accordingly, this is not only an aesthetic problem, this is a problem that comes with both quality of our life and longevity. Now we have touched primarily on the state of the spine, but it is important to understand that if we have a patient with hyperlordosis, then this leads to overstretching of the abdominal wall, and this leads to excessive stress to the spine. A healthy abdominal wall should normally hold about a half of the load at the moment when you lift something. Every time you pick up something, it puts excessive stress on the lumbar spine. In addition, inadequate tone and overstretching of the abdominal wall results in the decrease in abdominal pressure. This in turn leads to the fact that the efficiency of the digestive processes is also noticeably reduced. So, nutrients aren't digested well. You get fewer nutrients, and also they tend to be stored in fat. Accordingly, posture problems lead to neurological problems, the problem of digestion, metabolism, and many other problems which we'll now talk about. Let's look at the example of our model, how the problems that we've talked about theoretically are embodied. To begin with, we can say that the amount of the subcutaneous fat is excessive but not determinative. We should have about 1 centimeter when we pinch the subcutaneous fat between our fingers. We have about 2 centimeters here. That is not very much. In addition, there is absence of the tone of the internal abdominal oblique muscles. If there was the healthy tone, then there would be a dimple above the ilium. This dimple is absent, accordingly it says that the tone of the abdominal wall is insufficient. In addition, we can say that the state of excessive lower back deflection is quite obvious. We have a fairly deep spine buried between the muscles that straighten the spine. A deep fossa is a very unpleasant problem with the condition of the spine. There is almost certainly the increased risk of hernia formation. In addition, almost certainly there are some jammings, ridiculous syndromes in the lumbar nerves. In addition, we can quite clearly notice that the pelvis is tilted forward. Here is the line. The pelvis should be in the horizontal position. Here is the bone. The anterior superior ilium and the posterior superior ilium should be on the horizontal line. If the pelvis is dumped forward, the pelvic bowl is dumped forward. Then accordingly we have hyperlordosis. If it is thrown back, then we accordingly have insufficient lordosis, and this is another problem we aren't talking about today. It is important to understand that the problem of a sprawled pelvis and overturned pelvic bowl is associated with many events throughout the body of the pelvis. Due to the fact that organism has excessive deflection in the lower back, it is forced to have excessive deflection in the thoracic region, which leads to the fact that our model is hunched over, which leads to the fact that the head comes out forward and the head tilts back. Accordingly, there are problems in the scalene muscles. Accordingly, there are problems in the innervation of the diaphragm. And accordingly, for example, there will be a tendency to a more depressed and gloomy mood. This problem is associated not with the nature of our model, but with how she moves, how her body is oriented in space. At the same time, we can easily and gracefully solve this problem if we understand one feature of what happens to the body. The fact is that the tone of the anterior surface of the body is insufficient and the tone of the posterior surface of the body is excessive. Accordingly, by correctly positioning the load vectors, by correctly straining the anterior surface, we will be able to obtain visible and tangible effects right now. Now I ask our model to perform a few simple and intelligible actions, and you're going to see how her posture changes and how her belly is going to change. If you feel your belly is bulging out, do it with us. First you need to pull the kneecaps towards yourself. That is to strain the rectus femoris muscle. We tighten the kneecaps. Second, we raise the pubic bone up. Pull the pubic bone up, and at the same time we stretch ourselves out by an imaginary thread which is located at the crown of our head, and we do it all at the same time: knees, pubic bone, sternum and crown. Tatiana, try it. And you find that your body is lining up. Oddly enough, this sensation is perceived as more stable and more confident, and at the same time, the stomach is quite clearly drawn in. The state when your front surface rises all up, and the whole back surface stretches down. It is natural for your body. It is worth paying attention to every time you think about it. But there are other ways to go forward in solving this. Firstly, if we're talking about our model, then breathing is of great importance for her. Judging by the posture of our model, she has a tendency to absorb energy inward, closing, but accordingly, every time you breathe more intensively, taking a full chest breath, you will pull the front surface towards you. Pulling in and relaxing the diaphragm will cause the abdomen to be pulled in, and accordingly the posture will be improved. In addition, it is recommended to perform actions for stimulation the rectus abdominis muscle and the rectus femoris muscle. Let's see how it will look on the couch. As always, I warn you that I'm talking about the most common cases. There are always details. We discuss the topic in detail as part of our force lines course. Obviously, it is necessary to tone the superficial frontal line, and it is necessary to relax the surface of the back line in accordance with the concept of lines of force. There we talk in detail about our course, force lines. So, the most common option is when it is necessary to tone the rectus abdominis muscle, which is attached to the ilium and knee, and to tone the rectus abdominis muscle, which is attached to the costal arches and to the sternum and to the pubic bone. Accordingly, the main effort that we make in the main, and as a rule, is the direction of movement from bottom to top, from the knees to the hip, and from the pubic bone to the rib cage. Obviously, in many cases the problem is located elsewhere. For example, a person may have problems with the diaphragm or with the scalene muscles. Let's show you a bit of practical work. I put some oil on the front of the thigh and begin to move the front of the thigh upwards. What will interest me most at the very beginning is the attachment points of the rectus femoris muscle, which is one of the heads of the quadriceps muscle, to the ilium. These areas are usually extremely painful, so be gentle and patient. You can find your rectus femoris muscle if you sit, place your palm on your thigh right next to the flexion point and lift your knee. It is recommended to work until the painfulness completely disappears. The purpose of this movement is to remove edema and eliminate inflammation at the points of attachment of the rectus femoris muscle to the ilium. The second important place will be where the rectus abdominis muscle is attached to the pubic bone. In some cases, the rectus abdominis muscle does not work due to the fact that there are problems in the pelvis and sacrum. Accordingly, we are not considering this option in this video. You are working on the attachment point of the rectus abdominis muscle to the pubis. This place should be painless. Accordingly, you massage it in a day for no more than 3 to 5 minutes for about 10 days. The painfulness should go away. If it does not go away, then there are other reasons. Accordingly, the third place with which we work will be the place where the rectus abdominis muscle is attached to the ribs. An important essential detail will be the understanding that the rectus abdominis muscle is not attached directly to the costal arches, but slightly higher, at the level of the fifth rib. That is quite high. Again, I remind you that the problems with the rectus abdominis muscle can be associated with the problems of the diaphragm, so watch the corresponding video on our channel. In addition, an important part of the work will be the work on the rectus abdominis muscle directly, when we begin to slide along it, shifting the entire volume of the muscle up. Remember that right and left rectus abdominis muscles coexist, and it is important to work both in order to get a good result. In some cases, there are lesions inside the muscles themselves, both the rectus femoris and the rectus abdominis muscle. In some cases, there will be distinct pain points right in the muscle body. They also need to be worked on. The next important action will be to work on the back of the body. Let's roll over. If we are working upward on the front surface of the thigh and abdomen, then the movement along the back surface is, rather, directed downward. I hasten to please you. We are preparing to shoot a large lecture video on working with the lymphatic system. Stay tuned, subscribe to the channel. So the main part of the work is associated with the fact that we shift the fascia of the lower back. Move in the direction of the legs and continue the same movement along the back of the thigh. I repeat once again that there are always details. We are considering an ideal case. Almost all the time there will be deviations in a real living patient. A very important part of the work will be the sacrotuberous ligament. It connects the sacrum and the ischium. In order to do this, you need to find it and move it mainly down. As you saw earlier, the lumbar spine is quite deeply forward. Accordingly, this is a pathology, and we should do something about it too. The standard way of working to reach the vertebrae in the dorsal direction is to pinch the skin and try to separate it from the spine and pull the skin back. I recommend you to be careful with this movement. Avoid sudden moves because this can destabilize the problem vertebrae and cause aggravation. Be very careful with this movement. And so we work along the entire back surface down, especially the lower back. But also, in most cases, it will not be useless to work on the thoracic region and in some cases even the calves and feet. Let's see what changes we've got as a result of this 10-minute session. Please get up. And here we are. Right now I see that the stomach at least is not the most protruding part of the body. I can see that the deflection in the lower back has changed and the vertebrae are no longer as deep as they were before. Obviously, this work takes time. Obviously, it is required to repeat the same actions for several days in order for the body to get used to the new state. A person has been walking in this state for decades, and it would be naive to believe that within 10 minutes we can solve the problem forever. But nevertheless, systematic, progressive work will help you get changes in the lumbar spine of the vertebral column and get wonderful visual changes on your stomach. And even in 10 minutes we've got an excellent result. And I thank everyone who watched the video to the end. Don't forget to press the like button, it will help the channel develop. Stay with us on the channel of Vector Massage and Somatics, the channel where we teach you how to do massage and earn good money with it. Stanislav Chernog was with you. See you again, goodbye.